the biggest vulnerability occurs through IAM as far as pure hacking, like an actual, in your system. You have to bear in mind, like, oftentimes a hacker, like on average, is in your system for 18 months before there's ever any use of those, tools or the viruses or the malware. It's just dormant, right? Or collects information, and that it isn't immediate in a way that I think a lot of people just in the, broad public would imagine it to be.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today we have another great guest. Before I introduce her, though, I got to remind you guys, we all work for the algorithm. Please hit the like and subscribe button so we can keep bringing you this great content week after week, and we can bring these great guests with their immense knowledge who are gracious enough to share that knowledge with all of you. So then without further delay, our guest today is a young lady named Tiffini Smith. Tiffini is an attorney. She is a patent attorney. She is licensed in the United States and over in Wales and in England. She's got quite a bit of experience, and she is an expert in privacy, cybersecurity, AI governance. She has led global legal teams and provided global cybersecurity legal advice to executives, board members, and that includes advice addressing such issues as incident response readiness, vendor risk programs, AI model risk reviews, all coagulated into board briefings. She's done it all. We're glad to have her. Tiffini, thank you for being on our show today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here and excited to join and to share.
I got to tell you, we got to get a little bit of your background. Like, well, off air, we learned a little bit that you're actually from Louisiana, but you're licensed in Wales and England, and you're a global person. That I'll tell you that people would probably not guess that. So please tell us how you got into this.
I think that reaction is very common, and especially as a Louisiana native. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I've lived, as you denoted, Manoj, all over the world. So quite a bit of time in Europe, in Ireland, time in the UK, France, Argentina. So and years,
Wow.
years at stints, and then a long period in Myanmar, so Southeast Asia as well. And
Wow.
yeah, being a girl from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, you don't quite expect me in Yangon, Myanmar, or to meet me or have that background. I would say, how did I get started with global travel? I think it was in at the end of law school. So I'm an engineer by background, so undergrad, grad engineering. Then I went to law
What
school.
kind?
I'm an electrical engineer,
Oh, well, I'm
software.
aerospace, so
Oh,
there
okay,
you go.
got it. Yeah, I'm a programmer by, I'd say, or signal processing. That was my area of specialty. So not quite
Awesome.
hardware, but yeah. So and then I went to law school, and then law school kind of started to get the bug for international work and just systems. I think as an engineer, I like understanding or like the background behind things. And so when I started to understand the distinctions in legal systems, for me, it became even more interesting. And then how did these laws evolve? And there's often, being a Louisiana native as well, in law school, they often say like, oh, these laws apply across, the United States or the multi-state kind of portion of the bar exam, except Louisiana. And it goes back
Really?
to some of that historic kind of knowledge. And once you see the international system, because it was French for so long, then Spanish, then back to France, a lot of Louisiana's laws are codified versus like common law, which would be a bit more the British system or the UK, England, and Wales system, which the US takes most of its kind of legal strategy from. So that intrigue, plus a love for culture. I love meeting people. Like, it expands my perspective, and I like that expansion of myself, and also the experience of when you're working with people in other cultures. the awareness of myself. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I went, "Oh, I'm so American," and you don't realize that you are, and to be in a different context, you see that, and also to learn how business operates in different jurisdictions. So,
It's interesting that you bring that up because I can tell, even my personal experience traveling globally, you don't realize how good you have it in the United States until you're not here anymore. Because there's a lot of things here that, especially in regards to innovation and entrepreneurship, that you can do that, yeah, you can do those in other countries, but they're not as easy.
right, and that gets to the legal landscape. So it's an excellent kind of, I'll call it, tangible experience that you're describing that you had. But when you think of the systems behind it, and I call them systems, but by systems I mean evolution of law, evolution of culture, then it makes a bit of sense. And I just would make a note here, Manoj, for those listening. I'm just speaking in my capacity as Tiffini, not as legal counsel to anyone, and then also not on behalf of my organization. These are my personal views and opinions. But when you think of, and again, I go back to that Louisiana example of the law evolution, right? When you think of the United States and our kind of frontier identity as a country and our expansion kind of approach, that is how we approach business, and therefore the laws kind of, I don't view the US as regulation first. It's almost like let the reaction to the technology or the like societal response or potential impact be what then drives regulation versus a kind of a forward, let's regulate before. It's almost like a landscape of entrepreneurship, open, less regulation, even though I do think oftentimes in an American perspective, we may believe that it's highly regulated, but oftentimes the regulation follows what's viewed as a need that's been identified post development of product. So I think that makes sense. Your kind of experience of opening a business, or as someone is going global, if you're coming from an American context to then be in a European context or a Southeast Asian context and want to launch business, it's a different process, and it's a different um, series of regulations. Not that the U.S. is unregulated. I don't also want to say
Right.
it will be state by state potentially. It's a different type of complicated system in the states.
So when you look at Europe, we do. Um, I mean, I personally think of it as a very regulated market, and just from the experience we had. I mean, you look at GDPR is there. We don't have anything like GDPR in the U.S. as a global federal umbrella.
Right.
We have the CCPA, which has its own
Exactly.
thing. You have the New York Act, which is its own thing, right? And
Exactly.
it's it's not even enforced. Like if you're in Pennsylvania and you say you want to invoke the CCPA to be forgotten, it doesn't work. The companies won't let you do it,
Because
right? They just
it'll be about the resident. Is that person a California resident? Are they resident in California for the CCPA?
exactly.
Right. So
Whereas Europe, it's uniform. This is it, right?
right. They'll have a directive, and then each nation will then bring, depending, sometimes they're regulations, and then sometimes they're directives. And effectively, it's just what you're saying. It just means that each nation will have a certain period of time to make that directive the nation's laws. But it creates a very uniform strategy and approach, even if it's a directive versus a full on EU regulation. You end up with a landscape that's not as distinctly different potentially as the US can be from state to state.
What does this do in the world of cybersecurity? And let me phrase this way. In our experience, cybersecurity is not something people wake up in the morning with and say, you know what, today we're going to do some cybersecurity in the company. It's not like that, right? It's usually there's some kind of hammer that came down on them, whether it was a regulatory requirement, right? Or it
Mhm.
was a set of insurance requirements. There was something external to their organization which would affect them monetarily that is forcing them to look at cybersecurity in any kind of a meaningful way.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, in Whereas in Europe, where you have this regulated environment, does that force the necessity to look at cybersecurity all the time? Whereas in the US, it's on a case by case basis. I guess I'm asking, have you seen,
It's
what's the cultural difference here in the outlook then
such
between?
an excellent question, and it's I'm debating how to approach it because it's so good. Like, so there, I would say, let me think of a short or a succinct way to approach it. But an example for myself, I'll put myself in it, when looking at EU directives as they are coming forth. So I'll use a directive, and you'll have it come forward about cybersecurity. Like there was one, the Digital Services Act, which has cybersecurity implications. And you'll note whether it's that, the EU AI Act, and they're either regulations or directives, but you'll have a period of time for compliance. And so in that
Okay.
period, businesses will look and assess what the impact will be to them and adjust their business. You're looking at maybe an 18-month lead time, let's say. In
Okay.
other instances, depending on the scale of the organization, some organizations, or as the EU starts to release drafts, you will then, as a lawyer, I'd go in and counsel or take in this draft directive and say, what would the impact be if this actually becomes law, and how will we be responsive to it? Um, the difference in approach would be the United States, we have what you may have heard like NIST, which is a
Yep.
framework, and it'll be a recommendation of how you can be secure. But it's not
Sure.
legally required that you abide by NIST. You can use it as a guidance. And there are other certifications that an organization can obtain to kind of prove their security posture, like a SOC 2, or that they're ISO 27001 certified, just to evidence,
Sure.
but not per se this directive for what exactly kind of minutia of security posture or requirements are needed. The EU approach is a bit like, depending on where your business and your solution fits within the market, it's like they say that well, there's more risk potentially in certain segments, whether that be critical infrastructure, you could think of it that way. And
Okay.
therefore, because of critical infrastructure, we want heightened requirements there. Or we're going to call you a higher risk business and require these kind of proactive notifications and measures that that organization has to take. There are certain exceptions for smaller businesses. So just thinking of persons that may be listening that are smaller organizations in those markets or want to be in those markets, there are certain exceptions because of the kind of weight or the impact on a smaller organization, as well as the potential impact that they would have on the broader market. Um, there may be lightened or loosened restrictions onto that. I hate to call it restriction, but obligations or
Okay.
requirements on those entities.
We have a little bit of that here with CMMC, right? Because you see
Exactly, that structure.
CMMC, yeah, that structure where if you're a really small contractor, you don't have to abide by all the 110 controls of a larger business that may be imposed upon you as you grow up, or I should say, as you go up in contract, but not grow up, but go up in contract value, right? But uniformly, we don't have that. It's just, it's
Exactly.
whatever you want to do. Now, the one thing I would say is, does it really matter? Because we look at all the breaches that happen,
Oh,
especially the major ones.
yeah.
Like, remember in the UK, Capita got breached, and they're a huge organization, and they have every technology and control, and I'm sure they could produce compliance paperwork out the wazoo. Uh, we recently saw Land Rover Jaguar, the largest
Yeah,
bailout,
yeah,
public bailout in history, because, and I'm sure they had every system and control and God knows what not that checked every compliance. In the United States, we've had so many companies from Target to Marriott to, you know, MGM, you pick, they've all, and these are all monster companies. These aren't small businesses that have layers and layers of security. So my question to you is, what does compliance really buy you? What is it really getting?
Well, so if I go pure regulatory, right, like pure law, I do think that they are mitigators, right? Like there are mitigations to potential exposure with like the mitigation and actions that you've taken to proactively try to protect your customers, your business requirements on your vendors. So there is the impact, like you're describing, hey, these breaches happen, this has massive impact. Then there's also regulatory fines, damages that can be, tripled, depending on the scenario. But if I were to go practical and just say, okay, hey, Tiffini, it still happens. So what does this mean? Like if I'm compliant, does that really help? And the way I tend to view it, and I think this is a great point about compliance versus as a part of business operations, to view security posture, like I tend to view it like a system, that it doesn't just, you can't outsource it. You can't hire a third party security services managed, services provider to completely insulate you from risk because you have employees. It's like a system, an organism, right? A living thing. And so employees come, employees go, employees have good hygiene, bad hygiene. So you have to think of it
Yeah.
like, what is your actual approach to your system? And if I were to make it practical, training, it matters. Employees to understand how to watch out for like phishing campaigns. It actually does matter. And it actually does help. And repeat training, it's not a one and done. I think of myself, you forget things, you're busy, you get distracted, but if you have that repeat, it refreshes. The other things is like you were starting to allude to earlier, things like vendor relationships, vendor controls. When I think of AI and using AI tools, how are you integrating your tools? Do you have awareness? And even with big companies, I think it can be slightly deceiving at times that they have that under control, because I think of that system mindset, right? Like the flow of people in and out, developers in and out, you know, decisions, who makes what decision at what level. They may or may not have all the controls in place to have that person who's maybe making a patch decision or bringing in a new vendor tool to do some new function for developer. Maybe it's a developer tool, but does it have API access? Or how many APIs do you allow access to your system? And are you creating vulnerabilities either through application security? I'll go identity and access management, just the mere, you turn off the password and username as employees leave, or are they on a year from now? And, that's huge vulnerability.
Well, I can tell you that they're on in the vast majority of companies. Very
Exactly.
few people get that right. But I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Keep going. You're on a
a
roll here.
verbal high five is, is amazing because it's something I think a lot of companies take. And I would say larger companies, maybe they do have that, hopefully, identity access management under some control. But that is the biggest, in my experience, the biggest vulnerability occurs through IAM versus just for that, as far as pure hacking, like an actual, in your system. And I know I'm giving a lot of data, Manoj, but
Please keep.
you have to bear in mind, like oftentimes a hacker, like on average, is in your system for 18 months before there's ever any use of those, tools or the viruses or the malware. It just lies dormant, right? Or collects information, and that it isn't immediate in a way that I think a lot of people, just in the broad public, would imagine it to be.
You know, you've said quite a few things there. One thing that's critically important, and I want to overemphasize, is you mentioned people at least a half a dozen times. And that to me is the number one cybersecurity asset in any organization are the people. And it's also, unfortunately, the most underutilized cybersecurity asset in most companies. And it comes down to, if you educate the people, and when I say educate, I'm going to go beyond phishing training, because that should just be a matter of hygiene. That's like brushing your teeth. But it should be about putting in place policies that are related directly to operational or revenue risk,
Mm,
and explaining the why behind those policies, and not make them mandates, but educating the people on it. Because once they understand the why, most people are very reasonable and they will comply, right? Whereas if you just put out a policy, don't work on a public Wi-Fi,
Like it's like why? I know it's inconvenient.
why? I mean,
Here.
what? Yeah, how am I going to do my job, man? There's a coffee shop next door. I can
Exactly.
do that. Or I'm stuck at the airport, and you're telling me not to work on Wi-Fi. Why? But if you explain the whys and then how to mitigate that, I think companies would be surprised to find how accommodating people can be. Right? Once they understand the why and they can relate to it and it's tangible, you're going to see a difference in behavior. That now enables or enhances the protections that technologies have in play in your organization, right? Otherwise, you build a bank vault, but your employees walk the robbers right in through the front door. It doesn't really matter that you got a bank vault. It's irrelevant at that point.
Right, exactly. And I think what at least I see in people and in doing those trainings, whether it's creating the material, delivering the training, there's a buy-in. I call it a buy-in, like an experience that happens where it's like, hey, I want to help us, our company or our organization, our customers, and there's this kind of I think when people understand the why and understand how they fit into that why, then it becomes a team kind of approach. And it's like we as a team and we as a company, we value this and we're taking these measures. And it's not just about compliance. It's now about being a part of that system or that kind of organizational, like this is who we are as a company. We care about these things and we want our customers protected, or we as engineers really value how we go about developing, and we have this process in place, and it's not intended to create development roadblocks. It's intended to, as we develop and get to our product launch, we have amazing secure product that is super attractive as a result. And I find developers will completely be into it, right? Whereas without that, they're like, dude, you're slowing down my coding. Like, what's happening?
Yeah,
You know, you're slowing down
exactly.
my whole effort. I need to launch, and you're making that launch more difficult. So,
You know, so how do you inculcate that way of thought in the board when you're advising them? What are you telling them to if they're asking you, Tiffini, how do we really mitigate our exposure to AI and cybersecurity? What from a legal aspect, what's your advice line here?
so it's a very big question. I mean,
Yes,
it's
it
valid,
is.
right? Like it's a big question. And I would start with my first thoughts, and I would say typical things for boards to consider your governance strategy, right? Because again, it's about like the system and having enough process, especially the larger you get, that you have some form of governance to say how decisions are consistently made, or as much consistency as you can create, and make those decisions that way, because that's going to it has impact financial at the end of the day. Non-compliance has impact usually through some breach. It's not going to otherwise become visible or evident. It's going to be through some type of activity that then that exposure occurs. And you want to have had all of the governance measures in place you can to mitigate them. And even though I am a bit of the mindset now, there will be hacks. It's not that you will be, back to your earlier point, it's not you're going to be hack insulated. It's
Yeah.
more so when that occurs, can you respond effectively and quickly? How long does it take you to become aware of a vulnerability or a risk, or that you have malware in your system? And can you, if a hack or some type of incident occurs, can you then shut that down quickly? That's on the cyber just end of it. But then also, I would say governance works with AI, especially as I start to see, and it's just my own personal interest, like the nexus or the kind of entanglement of AI with cybersecurity, and I envision what the future looks like from what will be enabled by threat actors and what they'll be able to do, and just the additional kind of proliferation of potential vulnerabilities as AI agents interface with each other through various corporations or development tools. I think that becomes even more a need for boards to start to think of what is your governance strategy, um, and AI, as an example, just is moving so quickly, but similarly, to not just have it so siloed that you aren't thinking about what this means for the company and the organization as a whole. One other final, like a point on just board advice too. I'm a fan of a CISO being a member of the board or having someone, I say CISO because I do think the chief technology officer clearly is there, but I kind of think there's something very beneficial to having a CISO advising or close to the board because of my view that cyber risks are just so prolific. And then I also think with the nexus of like quantum computing, AI, like it's just gonna, I think, exacerbate the scale, right? Or
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, at a personal level, I on this show I've brought this up a few times. The structure of the CISO, especially if they're reporting to the CIO, is very problematic in my mind. Some people don't agree with that. They're free to do that. But how can you be critical of someone that's paying your salary and your bonuses? That, at the end of the day, that becomes a real conflict of interest, right?
mm,
Because IT's job is to get things done, get them done quick, make sure there is the systems that are there to operate the company. They're not going to be there to be critical of those systems,
mm,
right? How they're structured, how they're organized, underlying policy directives in their governance and their use. That's not their core focus, right? You really need that independent, objective, outside view that can say, look, we have a real risk exposure in this way that we operate, whatever this way may mean. You know,
mm-hmm.
it's unique to, and separating the CISO out, I think, is a very good idea. But then CISOs also have to learn the language of business. You know,
I,
they
yeah.
that's often where we see the downfall, that a lot of them are very technical. They'll be, you know, we need to do this for MFA or this for CASB, or we want to do this for our SIM and monitoring and red team,
Mm-hmm.
purple team, blue team exercises. Dude, what does that have to do with running the business? You got to understand how the business runs, and then bring that to the board in those terms, and bring the risk in those terms to the board.
Right, exactly. And it could be that it informs, like the CISO is informing the board, but I think it depends on maybe the scale of the organization. But I do appreciate that kind of input to the board. And I view it, as you just described, that kind of translation of technical risk into both regulatory, which will be legal and commercial impact, so that the
Yep.
board has a true, I guess, enough visibility to then make decisions kind of from that place. And I look at it almost like informed decision. Like the objective is to make sure
Yeah.
the board can make an informed decision. And so they'll need that input from those stakeholders to be able to really frame it in a way that it can be appreciated.
Now, if they do that and things go wrong, because they will at some
Do go
point. I
wrong. Yeah,
mean,
it happens.
they will go wrong at some point. How does this then quantify into legal losses, into regulatory, you know, fines, losses, reputational losses? Have you seen firms that actually have made a solid attempt? Does it actually reduce their monetary exposure and brand exposure?
So the lawyer in me, or I guess I go yes. The reason I say yes because I believe that if you are prepared, you will be able to respond quickly and respond faster to the threat. So therefore, it may not come across like as from a visibility perspective. We'll all look at here's what happened. So when we're talking about it, kind of that thing that's the negative, what didn't happen or what could have happened that you mitigated against. So it's you can think of it like, okay, maybe this is completely made up, Manoj. So this is just theoretical, but like,
Sure,
let's say
sure.
you have a data breach and you have 10,000 records that are impacted, but that quick reaction and that quick, response and readiness mitigated what could have otherwise been maybe entire system failure. Or we could use another example of maybe it could cause infrastructure to go down for weeks, and your quick response mitigated that to just a few business days or few hours, right? From a business perspective, that is tremendous amount of potential money depending on the industry that is mitigated. So we're talking about this kind of unknown negative that of things that didn't occur had you not been ready. So I do think there is actual commercial financial impact even in the event that the worst does happen if you're ready. If you're not ready, the worst is compounded. Like I view it like a compounded amount of exposure. Now, and I love the fact you raised reputational damage, because to me that is it's longer than any fine, it's longer than any cost that you may have had to pay to a particular individual consumer or person, or even let's say it was credit monitoring costs. It's way longer than that. If your brand is now tarnished because of this breach or because of the impact of some type of incident, you're looking at potentially years, or potentially sometimes things you don't fully get past, right? Like I still think at the onset, when you describe those breaches, those companies are still associated because of the sheer scale of the impact and the scale of the breach that they experienced, and how ready were they. Like Marriott, that Marriott breach,
Oh yeah.
it's like, it's like the star of bad incidents, right? And just the sheer impact to their brand, that they're still associated with that. So I do think it matters. I do think it mitigates commercially, for sure, because of the ability to kind of cut off the potential impact, and therefore your regulatory fines. Like obviously the fewer data sets and like instances, that you have in that list of, I'm calling it list, but like set, then that's a mitigation to the regulatory impact also. Now, some things when I think of it, you could have like kind of minimal cost exposure. You're gonna have litigation fees or
Right.
litigators or lawyers, people like me to come in. But I do think it's still worth the cost in the sense of what it's preventing, right? So it's the classic lawyer. How would I say? We're it's almost like oftentimes lawyers are cost centers, and the problem is it's not. It's hard to quantify because it's a prevention. You pay for this legal support, but the legal support is aiding in the prevention of a loss or the reduction of a loss that you didn't experience. So how do I?
That's right.
Yeah.
To me, it's like taking out insurance on your house. You pay it every year. Your house didn't burn down, thank God. But if it did,
It's a big deal. You're so happy
it's
to
a
have
big deal.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And then even I love that analogy, because I would even say it's like, maybe when you pay it, it's like the fire truck comes out and you just lose your garage. You didn't lose the whole
Yeah.
house, right? Because you were able to
Right.
respond quickly and you had the right people and the right measures in place to do so.
Now, we got to bring AI into this because we just have to. That's obligatory. Now, my question to you on AI is when you look at regulations like CCPA and GDPR, I want to begin here because AI is a little bit of a unique technology. It's a free for all. So, if once you input the data to it, there's no delete function. Once you train an AI model with certain data, you can't untrain it, right? It's not like days of yesteryear where you could go into a database and say, delete Tiffini Smith. All right. How can you possibly comply with GDPR or CCPA when AI starts ingesting your data? And you may even have a policy against it, but your employees may be out on Grok, Chat GPT, or whatever their favorite, God knows what, there's a umpteen number of technologies out there now saying, hey, yeah, I want you to read this document. And it's got all kinds of people's names in it, has all kinds of details. And now you're suddenly out of compliance and there's
Oh,
nothing
well,
you can, what do you do?
yeah, you just made my legal heart. I think I actually stopped breathing for about 3 seconds.
Uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. I've always been curious, like, how can how do you, there's no unwind here.
Yeah,
So,
it's an excellent question, and it is why those policies exist. So, I'll go from two angles. I'll go from the angle first of use of AI tools, like individual use, individuals using AI tools. I'm assuming, so this is an assumption, that most corporate organizations would either have an AI policy or they're drafting one about employee use of AI tools. This is where I think it's a great governance example because you want from a legal governance, not only for legal regulation, but just for data, right? We're looking at whole system, right? And when I say system, I'm thinking entity, organization as a system. But
okay.
you want to control or have some knowledge of where your data is going, to your point. Who is accessing, training an AI model, and just from an individual's use of AI with corporate information, I would seriously be thinking, is there a policy? Are you out of line as an individual with that, or out of compliance with the company policy? Because it is still corporate data. It's not going to belong to the individual, it belongs to the organization. Agree with you, depending on the tool. This is where that long privacy policy and that long set of terms and conditions that lawyers have written, there's going to be provisions in there about what that tool can do with that data, how that tool can continue to use that data, and what, if any, retention policy there is, like how long, right? And I've looked at some just because I think once you're fully aware, is you can't be unaware. It's like the first thing I do is go look at these privacy policies for random thing. If you name it, I go look. I would say, Manoj, like one example I can think of, I was considering, I was late for a flight or to the airport trying to get through to a flight, needed to get through the security line. It was just like around the building. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to make my flight. And it was clear and it's right there. And I'm like, I can go through. There's no one here, but I have to sign up. And what am I giving away when I sign up? What does it mean? What's the impact? Right. So then you read through those terms. When I think of AI, when you read through, depending on the tool, it may say things like, when I think of the terms I saw, that's a lot of right to use my information. If I give over my
Yeah.
biometric data, that, and they have the right to use that data. And so to your point about kind of compliance with CCPA or other, international or state regulations, they're going to have terms and conditions where you've basically agreed, you've basically consented, authorized, and granted that entity that right. So just, one of my tips becomes, as a person and an individual, try to be aware of what that impact is and don't reflexively just do it. Because in the moment, with my rush for my flight, my instinct is like, gotta get there, bada bing, bada boom, scan my iris, what are we doing?
Yep.
But then I would say, as an organization with governance, and so this is now not just the individual person and what does this mean with these tools, but then I think this is where AI governance comes into play for organizations as they start to either procure AI tools or develop on top of AI bases. Like maybe
Right.
they're starting to do development work on top of some, LLM. And what does that mean? Again, how is your data flowing? What is this instance of the tool? I'm not calling it instance, but how does this tool ingest your data? What are your retention policies? Where's it hosted? Where will your data be? And then make a conscious choice. It's back to like that board point of what do you want into these various tools and what do you not? And to have a strategy, even if it's not fully formed. Maybe you say, I know I don't want this, or I know, or maybe I don't know what I want or I don't want, but I want to keep my confidential business records as confidential as I can. Or I don't want risk or exposure around my customer data sets or, sensitive PI. And so then you make those choices, and maybe that becomes, well, if it's an LLM that does a certain function, maybe there's less risk for that organization. And they say, for this type of functionality, I'm willing to have a certain amount of data exposure or limited. This isn't data that I need to keep as confidential or reuse. This is just kind of pragmatic advice, Manoj, or thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, but maybe I would tend to go, if you're going to, if someone is considering utilization of LLMs that will train on your data, to me, that becomes a much riskier proposition. Or if you're going to have situations where there's agentic AI to agentic AI making certain kind of transfers of data or communication, it then means there's less of a human in the loop, less develop. It's like automated, right? All
Yes.
transfer. And that becomes a higher risk proposition to me because you can't put that genie back in the bottle, to your point. That genie
Now, I would, and that would, you can't put the AI genie back in the bottle. That's done and over with. So when you say don't act, you don't want to act compulsively, there's very few people who have the awareness to actually take that action. Most people are going to be like, I need to write this brief. If I use
yeah.
ChatGPT to do it, I'm done here in like 15 minutes. If I have to sit down and write it, this is like 2 hours worth of work, right? So they're just human nature being what human nature
Yeah.
is. They're going to take the shortest path typically to the outcome that they're looking for. So is it better then to just say, all right, you know what, these tools are out there, the genie is not going back in the bottle, and we as an organization will adopt these X amount of tools and put firm policies in place in the organization on how they're supposed to be used, rather than making a blanket statement that you can't use these tools at all, which is 100% sure to fail.
Right.
Right.
And I would wholeheartedly say that latter approach is a better one, right? Because you make then AI tools that you being an organization has had the opportunity to either one, to assess, maybe do a like POC, right? A proof of concept, test out the product first, see, and ask questions of the vendor, right? Understand how their tool works and how data is retained, and then put in controls for your data and for employee use of those tools, right? And to have, I'll call it, and I go, this still is probably medium to large organizations, right, that can negotiate these kind of one-off contracts or contracts for themselves
Right.
as a base product, and then they layer on their own product, right? Like that still means it's a certain company with a certain amount of monetary capital to invest in
Exactly.
the
Your
development.
average medium business cannot do that.
Right. And I think that's probably the higher risk. I go, it's back to training. I think, meaning employees, because to your point, people are people, and people are going to inherently want to make their lives easier. And we all have competing. It's almost like I don't want to, it's no judgment in the sense that everyone has kids, you know, things that are pulling their attention, whether it's family, kids, life obstacles, and they want to be efficient at their work. So I think if you can educate employees into what that risk is and why they don't want to utilize these tools so openly in certain ways, and what that kind of downstream impact could be for the data of the company. And I think you can help to get that buy-in, to get them to then pause before they go and put company information inside of ChatGPT or, any other AI tool. It's like I wouldn't even Google, and people now tend to think of Google like antiquated, as if it's, and they go, oh, it's so antiquated. But I wouldn't have even Googled with, like, they just, and I know I'm a lawyer and this is me with my lawyer hat, but it's just so beyond, or I understand the impact and the risk of the company. If you take confidential information and put that inside of public forums, you have to think of it like a public square, and imagine it's not, even though it feels like it's in your private possession, it's actually a public square that you're sharing this information in. Or another way, I've, at least with other lawyers, when I would be working with lawyers who were learning the space or coming up to speed on things, there's a contract provision that we often in intellectual property called a residuals clause. And a residuals clause is
Okay.
things that people learn in the process of doing their job. They can't unlearn it. And so you have a clause in
Right.
the contracts, you say, well, whatever is retained in the natural memory of a person, they still own that knowledge. Like I learned to ride a bike. I can't unlearn to ride a bike just because I'm no longer working for the bike company. I'm going to always still know how to ride that bike. So to think of it like there is this residual, almost like this is now a residual knowledge or part of this new system that it has now learned and become, you know, a part of what that system knows. And are you comfortable with that? Right. And then what do the terms and conditions for the vendors access? Let's say it's an LLM, but what do they say they retain? Is it, you know, think you hear classic terms, but like kind of de-identified, anonymized, decentralized, where it's not itself anymore. Is it now a residuals clause? Is it now just residual knowledge and not your core data? Or is it just going to go back and
Hmm.
pulling back on your data set? Because I do think that gives a blush to kind of how much risk, even as someone's trying to assess, like, is this more akin to residual knowledge? Or is this actual data sets that are stored, retained, and repulled again and again? And then function is
That's
analytics, you know, like is it just analytics usage of your data or is it usage of your actual data sets?
very, I had not considered it that way. You put a real legal angle on this,
Sorry.
which is really good. Are you training other attorneys
I,
on understanding this? Because you understand a lot of these issues. A lot of attorneys don't, I would imagine, don't know some of these things. Are you actually training corporate departments on
I
how
have,
to look at these?
yes, I have. So I have had the pleasure, I call it, to, and the opportunity to train others who are lawyers. So from every kind of field. So not necessarily in cybersecurity or intellectual property, but it could be my colleagues in employment law or commercial negotiators. So as they're negotiating commercial contracts, that would be the biggest bulk of lawyers that I've trained, just so they can kind of identify what the kind of impact of that language would be and how to draft language to address some of the risks. So kind of like, hey, we want to have this tool and we want to use this tool. How can we utilize this tool in a way that doesn't expose, you know, company valuable items or expose our customers, but yet still what contract language would work? And I think if you can visualize and kind of understand the impact, then you can draft. Because I always view kind of the commercials come after the agreement and the understanding, and so then the rest is just we're wrapping that deal and that understanding between those parties. We're using language to try to make that, you know, crystallized. But the deal happens first, even from a product counsel view. So in one of my prior roles with a cybersecurity business division, so selling cybersecurity services, it would be like as you're starting to develop a product, how to be strategic with what tools we're ingesting. It could have been open source software. It could be now AI tools. But as you make those decisions, what functionality, like again, kind of measure pausing, being that lawyer that's like in the trenches with the development team, being a lawyer that sits inside with even the budget team and they're trying, or the budget holder who's trying to decide what markets to launch a product, but sitting with them to help them make that choice, I view as a form of training. So that it's like I don't know if you'd even call it, it's like coaching. Like I'm your, you know, it's like we're in this play together out on the field. And I'm like, hey, maybe we should run this play because I can see
Yep.
guys running at us from here if you don't protect that data. Or I can see with this open source software, if it's a copy left license, you're going to have problems. Or I know this is an initial client engagement and maybe we just want to win the relationship. But let's, you know, pause for a second. Does this relationship win cost us a longer term market position? And so we win this one engagement, but do we lose market advantage and broader, longer term like opportunities because you kind of gave away the baby with the bathwater? So to
That's
speak.
that's really cool. It's a great way to think about it. And boy, I got so many more questions, and we're already at the top of the hour here, Tiffini. But so I wanted to give you a minute. if you want to plug anything for our audience, anything you want to bring to their attention, why don't you let us all know?
Oh, that's great. Well, I would say I am in the process of launching a newsletter. It kind of, like you described, I love training and just talking and sharing, and in a pragmatic way, like in ways that I think help not only business clients or business people, but rather just us as individuals, right? Like me at the airport, right? So I'm launching that. And then also, please find me on LinkedIn. I would love to connect with many more people, opportunities. I have a few other speaking opportunities coming. I'll be posting those and the dates there as well. So thank you for having me on, Manoj.
Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been a real pleasure, and it's just opened the door to so many more questions. I mean, no way could we cover them all in an hour, but well, really appreciate it. Don't be a stranger here, Tiffini. Come on back sometime.
I would love to be back. I would absolutely love that. So, and don't be a stranger, vice versa. We will definitely keep talking.
Sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Tiffini. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you. Likewise.